You're tuned in to The Dr. Kinney Show, and I'm your host, Dr. Erin Kinney, a naturopathic doctor and speaker dedicated to unraveling the mysteries of your body and guiding you back into balance. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Dr. Kinney Show. This week, I'm really pleased to have joining me Amanda Chay, who is a lupus advocate, and she is the author of The Girlfriend's Guide to Lupus. And I'm really excited to have her on for this episode because we haven't talked about lupus much, and it can be a really tricky, complicated condition. And I'm so excited that we have her here to share kind of all of the ins and outs and her experience with it and talk about her book a little bit. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I love to spread the word on lupus.
Yeah. So why don't we start by, can you share your story? And
Sure.
Okay, awesome.
Well, I'll begin by saying that most people take between 5 to 7 years to receive a lupus diagnosis. Very complicated. It mimics lots of diseases. Now, my story for getting diagnosed with lupus spans about 2 decades, which is quite rare. And when I was pregnant with my first daughter, I was very sick, very, very sick, like 7 hospitalizations, multiple feeding tubes. And we never really figured out what was going on. In fact, they never looked at it. But my daughter was born and they just said, okay, your daughter's born, it's great. And we moved on. I had another daughter without any trouble. But then when I lived in Florida at the time, I started having a lot of joint pain. And I would just say to myself, I'm a beast working out. And so I blamed it, like a woman, on me. I started having things that would go wrong. Like I would have a lot of mouth sores all the time. And I would ask the dentist and she would be like, yeah, it's nothing. Or living in Florida, which is ironic, my vitamin D was really low. And the doctor would be like, oh, I don't know, just take some vitamin D. So in looking at it in a single instance, not a big thing, but I knew some things were going on. And when I moved to North Carolina, where I live now, I had a lot of joint pain. I would be teaching boot camps for people and I would cry after class because I would be in so much pain. I ended up at an ortho because I thought something was related that way. And that's when I got my first diagnosis with Sjogren's disease, which is an autoimmune disease that one of the main things it does is it dries up the cells and the moisture producing cells, so the mouth and the eyes, but something didn't feel right. So if I fast forward 8 years, I have a rheumatologist who says to me all the time, are you losing your hair? And I would be like, what? No, why should I worry about that? Or she kept asking me if I had lung infections or any chest pain. And I didn't know what was really going on, but I would go home and I would Google all these things. So I knew that they thought I had lupus. And when this one test came up called an ANA, it tested positive, and my doctor was like, Eureka, now I can finally send you to another specialist. Because when your specialist sends you to a specialist, you're in for it. So then I eventually got diagnosed with lupus because with lupus, let's give you a little background. 1.5 million Americans have lupus. And almost all of them are women. A very high percentage of them are women, which is not uncommon. Now, the American College of Rheumatology gives you 11 criteria, and you need to have 4 of the 11 to be diagnosed. So when my doctor was waiting for this one ANA test to test positive, she was looking for that before she sent me on, but I probably had 8 of the symptoms. And there is not one blood test that lets people know that they have lupus. That's why it's such a challenging thing. So my story is kind of a long story, kind of a weird story, but I want people to know that when they feel like something is wrong with their body, man, get feisty, get in there and don't settle until you know that something, comes up with a solution or at least an answer for what your struggles may be.
Yeah. And if your practitioner that you're working with doesn't listen to you and tells you that you're fine and you're not fine, find somebody else, right? Like I talk about that a lot on this show that if you're no, something is really wrong and you've been like, oh, your labs are fine, everything's fine. Or kind of in your case, like, oh, it's a little low, but not a big deal. Or, oh, this is a little off. Like, you know your body better than anyone else, right? And I always try to tell this to my patients, I might think I know what's going on, but I don't live in your body, right? Only you live in your body. So I think it's really nice to have the message to be like, hey, you need to, I liked your get feisty and find someone who's going to fight for you and figure it out, right?
Yeah. But my first doctor, the ortho I went to, did one of these, I keep always imagining, he's patting my hand and he's like, you're just older now. And I'm like, oh, no, you did not.
Oh, God. I'm like, this is me off so much when they're like, oh, that's you're when, just we found one thing. You're stressed and you're old.
I knew it. Medical gaslighting, certainly for women, is very, very common. It happens all the time. And, our health, if we have nothing, it's our health. The health is usually there. That's the base. Everything grows off of it. And so we should be tenacious in fighting for our health.
Yeah. Yeah. We really need to be. And good thing that you were, right? Because you kept at it.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is only 5 months after I was diagnosed, that daughter that gave me such trouble during my pregnancy, she was also diagnosed with lupus.
Interesting.
Now that her odds of getting it aren't great, they're like 10%. So women who have it or carriers are 10% likely up to give it to their daughters and only 2% for their sons. And she happened to get mono in her freshman year of college. And she was very sick all throughout college. And when I got diagnosed, I'm like, you are just like me. And then she instantly got her diagnosis. So her struggle wasn't as long to get a diagnosis, that is, but her struggle is lifelong because lupus remains chronic and incurable.
Yeah. It's interesting to mention that she had mono. I treat a lot of Epstein-Barr virus and, viruses like that and or Lyme or other things, they can sometimes be the thing that if you've had the genetic predisposition, those viruses can trigger autoimmunity in quite a lot of people.
You've hit it.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting.
And that's what happened. Oh, good.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say my trigger for me was being pregnant, being really, really sick when I was pregnant, and that came on. So just like you said, there's a lot we don't know about lupus, but we do know that you have the genetic disposition, you wait for that environmental trigger. A lot of people have sun or mono or being in a car accident. Someone I know got hit by a car and suddenly lupus burst out. And once it burst out, it's not so easy. It's near impossible to just shove it back in.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, like in the naturopathic medicine world, the core belief that most of us that practices medicine have is that the body can heal from almost anything. And, diseases like lupus and other autoimmune things, your immune system has completely turned around and it thinks that all of your cells, lupus is essentially like the body is attacking the DNA of, it's attacking like the nucleus of your cells. And so every cell can have problems. And that's why it's so difficult to diagnose because you get all these random symptoms and they might pop up at different times. And so it's hard to really see it. And, a lot of people do spend years and years and years without getting a diagnosis. And, I think any autoimmune disease, if you can kind of figure out all of the different things that got the immune system to go crazy, really, you should be able to back it up and rewiring it. Now, lupus can be a really tricky one because it's like the body's attacking every single cell type. But I don't know where you are in your journey with lupus, if you've gotten to a place where you're feeling better, or would you share a little bit about that? Are you in a place where your system's functioning better, or where are you in your health journey?
Well, if you saw me Saturday and Sunday, I was not good. So I am a beast again on my health. It is super important. Before I had lupus, I was the same. I have watched what I ate. I have worked out since I was 18. I'm 48 now. I practice mindfulness, stress, all these things I know. That's why I wrote the book. I wanted to give women insight. And despite all of this, lupus still has a very strong hold on me. It is a daily basis on what shows up and how I feel. And, on Saturday, all I did was clean my house. I cleaned my house, nothing crazy. It wasn't I would think about mop. I mean, what's a mop? I don't even know. But I cleaned my house. And then on Saturday night, I was spent. And on Sunday, I was terrible. So I think it's a journey with lupus. It's a journey between knowing when you have a flare or flare up, when your disease activity is high, and what you did to bring on that disease increased. And so, it's quite an enigma. And I feel like if I have the knowledge behind me and I've been on all these trials, I've done all this advocacy, and I still struggle, that perhaps, most other people probably struggle as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to talk about some of the things that you think have helped you with your journey and keeping on top of it? You want to share some of the things that have been helpful for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when one day when I felt really terrible, and I was feeling really sorry for myself. It was new in diagnosis. I had the realization that life could be a lot worse, that I didn't lose a kidney. People still die from this disease all the time. I'm still alive. And I wasn't completely healthy. I was somewhere in between. And that's really where I pulled up some of the knowledge there. Let's see. One thing I would say that's really important is to continue to move your body. in lots of different ways. And I know that's challenging when you have a lot of joint pain. And I'm not saying you need to go out and run a marathon. I am saying that if you push away from your desk, 5 minutes out of every hour, perhaps that's something. Maybe you can try to walk 1,000 steps. For me, it's always about making sure that I get cardio, getting my heart rate up, getting the strength in there. And I just happen to teach yoga, and people in the lupus community will roll their eyes at me because they think everyone says the answer is yoga. And it's not. That's simply the idea that can we stretch our body? It gets really tight. Everyone's body gets tight, right? We can only bend as far as we can stretch it. So we make sure that we can add that component in there as well. Movement is essential.
Movement is definitely essential. And, and yoga is movement, but it's so many other things. It's also calming the parasympathetic nervous system or the nervous system down. It's like, and when your immune system is hyperactive, we want to do everything we can to calm the nervous system down because that will eventually calm the immune system down. So it kind of tends to help with flares, right? I mean, I think most people with lupus will attest that when you're stressed, things get worse, right? Is that the case for you when stress is high?
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in my career, I spend my time educating businesses about the idea behind stress, and not all stress is bad, right?
Yeah.
If we think of, growing a baby, having a puppy, moving, a new job, like all of these things are stressful. And it's usually short-term stress that gives you the motivation. You get something done and then it goes away. And so the idea that I talk about a lot when it deals with stress, when it's lupus, is like, how do we limit and do everything possible to tamper down this chronic stress that we know increases inflammation and makes the cells die at a much quicker rate. And so, I think there's a good side of being able to connect to something you care about with that stressor in life, and finding ways to be like, okay, this is certainly lupus is stressful. This is my health. There's nothing more important. So I'm going to go out there and fight for whatever I can in order to be as healthy as I can be. And that will make a difference. It makes a difference to me. And I hope that it makes a difference to other people. But often at times we have to make really hard choices. There's people that aren't in my life that were once in my life before, because they weren't healthy for me, or it was really stressful for me to manage. And, those are big choices that you have to make. It's not, hey, let's go on vacation because my job is really stressful. It's like, maybe we need to find a new job or a new career path, one that doesn't involve such stress out there. And so it sounds like self-care, which is really important. But my view of self-care is not a bubble bath while drinking a Frappuccino. It's making those hard choices that prioritize what you really need. And yes, they're difficult, but ultimately they're what make up your health.
Yeah, they are. I'm glad you brought that up. It's such an important, and sometimes under talked about, I think, in the whole self-care realm. I think people think, oh, massages, and I'm going to go like on a girls' weekend. And those things are fantastic, and do all those things. It's really important to do those. But I think oftentimes, and I see this in a lot of my stressed out patients, that, they do all those things. They're like, well, I get a massage and I meditate, but they have some big pieces in their life that they're sometimes not really even willing to look at, right? Like sometimes you might be in a job you hate and you talk about it all the time, but you're not willing to be like, hey, maybe I need to prioritize my health over the job, or maybe it's a relationship, or who knows, maybe it's a dog. I have a patient that her partner's dog is terrible and it's like causing so much stress in their life. And she's like, I really want to tell him to get rid of the dog, but I don't want, but that's when that would be a self-care thing. Be like, hey, I'm going to stand up to my partner, be like, the dog has to go where I'm going, something like that. But I think these are really important. They're really important things to look at, especially when you have a chronic condition. Because most, there's so many things that can contribute to the development of any sort of chronic condition, particularly an autoimmune one, but stress always plays a major role, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most common triggers of a flare is simply stress. For me personally, I mean, lots of other things for different people, but we know stress is a big one out there.
Yeah. And it flares, whether you have an autoimmune condition or whether you have eczema, stress will flare. It will make most things worse. And the body cells don't work properly when you're under a lot of stress. Like your DNA doesn't even get read properly when the cell's super stressed. Things work better in the body when we're more relaxed. So the more things you can do in your life to get relaxed, I think your body can work better, which means you're going to feel better.
Yeah. It makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. So talk to me about your book, which I have not read yet, but I'm super excited to read. So talk to me about it.
Well, when I was diagnosed, of course, I went home and Googled and I bought a bunch of books, and they were thick books that were very medically based, but very clinically dry, and they didn't really give me a scope of what I was really up against. And so I wanted to write a book that would tell women the real thing about what was going on, things that even our doctors don't talk about, like why sex changes and what to do about sex and what an orgasm can help me feel less pain, which, yes, it can. But these things, there's an orgasm lab out of Rutgers. I learned a lot about. So, I wanted to talk about the real things that I wanted to know. And so I just wrote it from my point of view. And I also wanted women to know that part of their health has been robbed and stolen from them in the nighttime, but there's still a lot of your health left in you. And if you don't treat it and prioritize it like this, then it's going to be tough. And the more manageable your health is, the more manageable lupus will be. They were all directly interconnected because we still have power. Every single day we make very small choices over and over. And it's not climbing that Mount Kilimanjaro or running a marathon in life that's important. It's really about what you do every single day.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. And where can people find your book? Amazon?
Amazon. Yeah, of course. Yes. Amazon.
Awesome. So what else do you want to share?
Let's see. Let's talk about the idea of, I spent a few chapters in there talking about mindfulness and the idea of breath work. I think, we often don't breathe correctly. Life often causes us to breathe short and narrow. They called it even like email apnea, where we're just sipping little air in and out of our body. And that's not the best way to make an impact on our health.
So are you teaching some like belly breathing and some different breath practices?
Yeah. And at times, I talk about a chapter on mindfulness of what it is, what it begins to offer. But then I also, the next chapter, just call it breathing, because I think sometimes we feel an expectation that we have to sit still and close our eyes for X amount of period of time. And if you don't do that, then you feel guilty that I didn't do that today. And I didn't want women to have one more thing to feel guilty about. They don't have to buy a book or a sweatshirt or, a video or a program. I wanted to give women simple things that we could all do. So it certainly is teaching yoga for as long as I've done. The idea of breathing is just kind of paramount in my life. But like if I'm outside my house, I can see a road. If I was walking down a road and a car almost hit me, our tendency is to get really short and our breathing is quicker. And so the idea of a slow, long exhale is really, really important. You can breathe as normal as you do, but intentionally let that exhale down, and allows the body and the mind to know that things are okay and that you can calm down. And I think that a lot of times we don't think of a simple thing like that.
Yeah. And breathing is fantastic. It's free and you can do it anywhere, right? Like if you learn these techniques, right? It's such a good one to have. I think it's so interesting. I think in a lot of, if there's been a chronic health diagnosis, I see this in my patients. They come in and they're like, what supplements and what can I do? What are these higher level things and all these, these crazy intense treatments? And not that those can't be helpful, but the foundation things like moving your body that you mentioned, breathing, drinking water, getting outside, getting sunshine, getting adequate sleep. Those basics are the most important. And I talk about this on the show all the time. Like the basics are so important to the foundation of our health, right? And I think there's always a tendency, particularly in this age where there's all these, cool new treatments coming out and this therapy and that therapy. And it's like, oh, I got to go try this. And as you mentioned, like sometimes you don't want to have to do another thing, right? You have to go to another appointment and go get this treatment done. And again, not saying that they're not effective, and some things that are coming out are amazing, but if the basics aren't in place, and a lot of those basic things are free and they can be done anywhere. Like you can always get outside and take a walk, right? Maybe not, the weather's not so great, but getting outside again, going to bed early, resting your body, moving your body, doing again, these basic things, feeding your body, good food for whatever, works for your body. Those are the things that are so important to focus on. And again, with anything you have, they're free. Yeah.
And we're in America. We definitely like quick fixes, and there's no quick fix to our health. But we do have control of it, and you can show up for yourself over and over, and you can make mistakes. Like when I there's a few chapters on eating and what to eat, and I'm like, do 80-20, 80-20% of the time. So 80, eat good, eat what you know you need to do. Eat the fruits and the vegetables and lots of water and nuts and all these things. And the other 20%, don't feel guilty. Just take your steps to enjoy what you want to do, what tastes good to you. And that's okay.
It's totally okay.
We sometimes forget that.
And food, can be very important, making sure you're eating the right foods. But I love saying the 80-20 thing, because sometimes being on a very strict diet or even eating healthy all the time can be stressful, right? You want to be able to go out and be like, hey, I'm going to eat some birthday cake, or I'm going to have a drink, or I'm going to have a glass of alcohol, or whatever it is that makes you feel like you're living life. And granted, there are some cases and sometimes in people's treatment plans or health journeys where they do need to be more restrictive. But I think ultimately you want to get to a place where it's okay for you to eat what you want 20% of the time. And
well, when we deny ourselves all of these things, I think it's just like the unruly child that never got to do anything in life, that people go crazy, then they overindulge. Like, I have a friend who once a year on her birthday eats a cupcake. And I'm like, what the hell? I'm like cupcake today, and it was good. I just feel like we're going to harm ourselves in the long run if we deny these things. And if you add that quick fix, you get that drug that makes you, all better, but you don't change any of your habits, you're in for a long haul that's way more work than simply doing what you needed to do in the beginning. Yeah.
And I think that kind of ties into if you're in the moment and you're like, hey, I want to eat a cupcake, and your body's telling you eat the cupcake. It's like, listen, I think a lot of health is also learning to listen to your body, right? Learning to listen. Hey, back to what we were talking about before, like if your body's giving you signs like this job isn't for me, or this relationship isn't for me, or this dog isn't for me, or whatever the thing that you need to kind of cut out of your life, your body's going to tell you. And sometimes it'll tell you through a rash or a headache or stomach aches. And when we start to listen to the body, right, and we start to learn what it's saying, things start to feel like your body's going to work for you better when you listen to it, right? And so I think, if you're craving eating, your favorite bag of chips or whatever it is, go have that. There's probably a reason that your body's wanting that. So I think
so true.
Listening to the body is it's just an important thing to do. And I think a lot of times in today's culture, particularly in the United States, we shut the body up a lot. We get a headache. We're like, oh, let me take some Advil. Let me shut that off. I'm not going to think about, why do I have a headache? Am I dehydrated? Did I not eat enough today? Did I drink too much alcohol last night? Because if it was, I didn't drink enough water, you drink water, right? And the headache is the sign, versus again, just blunting the symptom and then going about your day. And usually the body will end up yelling at you stronger down the line. If you haven't had water and you take Advil, the next day you're probably going to have another symptom. The body's going to be like, please give me water, right? So when we learn to listen to the body and we don't just shut it up, we get better results with our health.
So true. And there's many great things out there, nuggets of wisdom, but tying to what you've been saying, one of the big things I say in my book, certainly at the beginning and many times through, is that idea of self-awareness. We think we are totally aware of what's going on, but stats show that probably 80% of us lack that self-awareness. And so I tell women to write things down, get an app, get a journal, record all the things that you think aren't really that important, but contain you out. Like, how much did you walk? How much stress did you have today? What did you eat? How much water did you drink? And, over time, that will begin to show you some factors of what your health is giving you in return. And you can find out where some opportunities to improve are. And, just being curious about how you're doing today is really important, and not just easily accepting what your body brings you.
Yeah. So this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for the work that you do to spread the word. And like I said, I'm so excited to read the book so I can, share it with patients. And I think I love when, obviously it sucks to go through this kind of journey, right? It sucks to have this diagnosis and to go through what you went through. But I think it's really cool that you're using your journey to share with others and to help other women. So thank you so much for doing that and putting it out there and being an advocate. Because, as we mentioned, this is complicated. It can sometimes take a long time to get diagnosed. So, if you are listening and you're struggling with a lot of weird symptoms and in your gut, something's not quite right, go check out this book. Are there any other resources that you want to share for people that you maybe you have them in the book, but anything else you want to share for listeners if they're kind of wondering if they already have lupus and are struggling on their journey?
Yeah. I'm happy to share. An easy one is, I have the website amandachay.com, which is CHAY. That was available. And then you can find me on Instagram, where I will often say other things, like Amanda Chay is my Instagram account.
Great. Well, we'll put all that stuff in the show notes. And thank you so much, Amanda. We are grateful for you coming on the show and sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge, and can't wait to read your book. See everyone.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. See everyone next week. Thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to connect with me on social media and leave a rating and/or a review. This helps grow the show so more people have access to this knowledge that leads to empowered healing. Love and light, and see you next week.